So first of all, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the first Fashion and the Tea webinar. I'm Emma, the founder of Fashion and Free, and I'm also joined by Made Institute's Robyn Dombey. So before we start, I just want to mention to everyone listening that aside from myself and Robyn, you're all on mute, videos are on mute, just so that everyone can hear us clearly without any background noise. And as we mentioned, if you have any questions for us at the end, just type them in the group chat and we'll be going through them all at the end. So first of all, I want to introduce the both of us properly. Robyn and I have been in the fashion industry for over 10 years. We've got about 20 years combined experience. And I know Robyn because we both used to work at Urban Outfitters together in Philly. And so Robyn's worked in both the luxury sector and for high street brands, which for anyone that's not familiar with the term high street, it's more like kind of like a mid-level market. So your Urban Outfitters, Zara, Primark, ASOS, that kind of level. But in the UK, we always refer it to high street as a high street brand. So if you hear that term mentioned, that's just what it means. And basically, Robyn's worked in both luxury and high street. And she also started her own sustainable denim brand, which she's going to be talking about more later. And then she's also the director of online courses and marketing at Made Institute, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, it's Philadelphia's premier independent fashion school. It's a bit of a tongue twister. And so yeah, and my background, I'm going to start with my background and then Robyn's going to talk a little bit more about her. My background is predominantly with high street fashion market, as I said. I started out by interning at a bunch of luxury brands like Diane von Furstenberg in New York, Matthew Williamson in London. And I landed my first job designing for the UK department store Debenhams in London, which some of you may be familiar with, others may not, because it's more famous really in the UK and Europe. And then since then, I've worked for Primark, which a lot of you may know, and then I eventually moved to the USA to work for Urban Outfitters in Philadelphia, which again is how I knew Robyn. And since then, I've also worked for a couple of smaller brands based up here in California, which is where I am now. So Robyn, I'd love to know a little bit more about your background, if you can just share that with everyone. You know, where you've worked previously and what it is you do at Made Institute now.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I am based here in Philadelphia now, but I grew up in the UK and that's where I studied fashion. So part of my degree at Westminster, we were really encouraged to do a lot of internships early on, and it was prioritized that we should work in, the luxury sector if we can, to get internships there, and then we could possibly transition into more high street roles. So that's what really led me into all of my first internships, which were I've got Alexander Wang, which is in New York. I was in the development department making samples. I worked at Lanvin in Paris. That was in the design department, so working on the collections for the runway shows. I was then, once I graduated, at Alexander McQueen as a graduate trainee. So it's slightly above an intern and slightly below an assistant designer. But that level and that particular place to work was extremely competitive. So I saw my opportunity to kind of grow a little bit more in the US. So I began applying for jobs over here, and particularly in New York, because I thought that's where the majority of them would be. And eventually landed a freelance opportunity at Marc Jacobs, which was a wonderful place to work. I finally got that position of associate designer, which was fantastic for my resume. And then after working there freelance for a few months, transitioned into a full-time role at Urban Outfitters in Philadelphia, working in the denim and structured wovens department. And then I transitioned into teaching at Made Institute and working freelance as a technical sketch artist for QVC, finally transitioning fully to be at Made Institute. So now I run the online courses and all of our online content. So if you're seeing any of the stuff on the website or social media, that's all coming from me now. But that's also allowed me a little bit of time to begin my own brand, which is Blue Bangs. And that is all to do with sustainable design in the world of denim. So I'm using 100% vintage denim.
Awesome. As you can tell, Robyn's taken like many different pathways throughout the industry, and it just goes to show that you can really like change things up as you go. You don't have to just be rooted into one area of fashion the whole time, which is, the whole, this whole, webinar is really about that, is, how to choose your path in the fashion industry. So we're going to elaborate on that more as we go. So the first like discussion point really for the webinar, as we've highlighted before, is how to decide whether working for luxury or high street market is right for you. So I'm just going to kick off with that. I mean, my experience personally, when I was at uni, and some of you may agree, I didn't really know where I wanted to work in the industry. I just knew that I absolutely loved design. I was super creative. I had a real passion for it. And I was good at it. But then I didn't know whether I wanted to work in menswear, in women's wear, in kids wear, or, high street luxury. So during my time at university, I really used internships to my advantage, and really used that to figure out where I felt I belonged in the industry, and what suited me. Until you actually have the experience of working for some of these places, you really like don't have a clue what it's really like, and what what life is like day to day. So even by doing internships at Matthew Williamson, at DVF, they were incredible experience and incredible insight into what life is really like there. So for me, like in the end, as I've said with my background, I ended up going down the more high street route, and that's purely because after doing some internships in both areas, I realized that I just felt I belonged more in high street. And it was a mixture of things. It was to do with it's to do with people a lot of the time. I felt that my experience interning in the high street, I felt like there was just a very different vibe. People were like, I'm not saying people aren't friendly in luxury at all, but the experience I had was that everyone was like so friendly, so welcoming, so eager to like help you learn and teach you, and really help you actually get a job. And it might just be that I had maybe I got lucky that I had such a great first experience, but that was really my experience of it. And luxury was amazing. Like you met some incredible people. I got to meet Anna Wintour, I met Diane von Furstenberg, Matthew Williamson. Like you get to meet some very cool people. There's a lot of celebrity around that area, around that kind of area in fashion. Can be very glamorous. I said to Robyn earlier, luxury fashion did remind me a little bit of the whole Devil Wears Prada thing, because often I'd come into the office, one of the internships, and one of the designers would have all her heels like neatly lined up underneath the desk, ready to go for the day. Little things like that. It was so amazing to see that firsthand. And I also really got the impression with luxury that both jobs, high street and luxury, really do live and breathe fashion. Like that is your, you don't stop thinking about it at the weekend, but it's just different ways of working. So I know people in luxury that still would spend their weekends at the office, and I but in high street equally you might not do that, but you're still on your emails all weekend, emailing China and India and whatever. So in that sense it doesn't stop. But that's kind of like my experience with both sectors. But I know with Robyn, obviously she's got even more experience with that side of things, as she worked for both. So for you, Robyn, I'd love to know like how you even ended up in luxury in the first place, because it's really difficult to get into, and how did it compare for you, because obviously you went from working in luxury to then working for somewhere like Urban Outfitters, where they're quite different.
Yeah, so to really go back to my first internship was at Louise Gray in London, and that was a small brand. There was, I think, the designer, the studio manager, and 12 interns. So it was really a massive force of, students working together, trying to figure it out to learn how to, build this collection in a very small team. But I really maximized on each internship. So there I was, a design intern, and that's always important to kind of define your role within the company and to really maximize on all the jobs you did. So on my first day, I was building like a desk chair, which wasn't the most glamorous thing, but by the end of it, we were working towards the runway show, and I met Stephen Jones, who designs hats and things like that. So you try and remember and take note of all the amazing little things that you do along the way. you know, mostly throughout the week you might be cutting patterns and trimming frayed edges off of things, but it's good to kind of learn as much as you can as you go through, and then you put that into your resume to try and get the next one. So then I got another internship at Nicholas Oakwell, which was a small couture brand. And between each of the steps, I managed to sort of bump up the name and the level of the brand. So the one that I got at Alexander Wang, I think, was the one that really helped me get on this path. And that was interesting because it was much easier for me to get into the development department at Alexander Wang. So as opposed to being a design intern, I was actually helping on the floor below, helping make all of the samples for the collection. So I was working with a really lovely team of seamstresses and pattern makers, and really understanding a lot more on how the actual collection came together to be made, which I think helped set me up for the next internship. So even though I wasn't a design intern, I was a development intern, the name on my resume really helped me get into the door at Lanvin. So I used a connection that I had at the university that had been an intern at Lanvin before, and she connected me with the designer, but I still had to interview and actually, you know, pay for my own fare to go to Paris and stay there to interview and meet with them and show them all my stuff. So I built a really good portfolio whilst I was at university of different projects that I'd been working on. And a lot of the things I encourage my students to do is to have lots of physical samples in their portfolio and to really work on your sketching, because it's most about the sketching as it is about the physical things that people can touch when you're in an interview. You know, we're all very touchy-feely people in the design industry, so it's nice to have those, you know, samples of pockets and lovely fabric swatches. Even if you can't afford the most expensive things for your final collection, you can still have beautiful fabric samples, little swatches in your portfolio. So that helped me get into Paris at Lanvin, and then it kind of snowballed, and I, you know, applied for the very top position companies that I possibly could for internships. And that really just through perseverance and emailing on the back of emails and connecting with people on LinkedIn allowed me to then get the graduate traineeship at Alexander McQueen, which was particularly competitive. There was a group of 6 of us, and then only one assistant designer role that we were all working towards. And it was a real mix of duties. So, you know, some days you'll be cutting out little paper sketches, you know, they'd like shrunk all the sketches down to make a little line sheet. And then sometimes you'll be like hand sewing things. So it was really a physical way of working. And I loved it because you were able to kind of respond very quickly. So I would speak to the designers and instantly be able to make something and go back and check it, which is where it's very different with the high street and, you know, fast fashion brands, is that, you know, there's a chain of communication, there's a chain of command. So once I actually eventually transitioned into working at Urban, I realized that it was much more structured, and I had to kind of go through the correct channels and, you know, wait for things to come from China, which I was just never used to at McQueen. I could just walk upstairs and grab something if I needed to. So there's a certain element of patience that I had to learn. And also there's a little bit more training at these, I would say, high street fashion brands. At the luxury brands, you know, it was very much about just, you know, saying yes to the job you're being given and trying to figure it out on the job. There's no time for too many questions. So kind of having the self-confidence to just kind of do it and try and figure it out. And I also built really good relationships with the seamstresses and the staff, you know, that were in the sample room. So they helped me a lot too along the way. So I do appreciate all of that. But then working at, you know, Urban, there's much more training, and you learn much more about the end of the process. So when I was working in luxury, you're working on every garment that ends up on the runway, but then you don't really see it after that, because then it gets handed off to the production team. Whereas at Urban, we were very involved in all of the samples, checking trims and all the things that came in. So I started to realize much more about the scope and reach of the brand. You know, it was far more international than I ever would have realized working at other places. And it really helped me to work on sort of my communication skills as well. So I think there's a lot to be learned in different places, but there's certainly a lot more perseverance and tougher skin required in the luxury industry, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think tougher skin for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I also think, I mean, I could be wrong. I think in fashion you get all sorts of characters across the board, as you know. I think luxury, there seems to be even more of these kind of extreme characters. I mean,
I just think they're working so very hard all the time. They're so dedicated to the craft. You know, when you work for designers. Lanvin Albert Albaz is, one of the legends of the industry. So he really set the bar for all the designers on the work that they had to create. So as an intern for one of them, the responsibility was then on me to execute all of her ideas. So there was a lot of responsibility and a lot of, almost tension to make sure that everything was spot on and done very, very quickly, because it was all more about, the more you can do, the more stuff you're going to get into the collection and the more likely you're going to be there the next season.
Yeah, and I think like honing back to like what you were saying about craft as well, is that, I mean, from my experience working at some of those luxury brands as an intern, I mean, predominantly my role was then, doing a lot of embroidery and embellishment work. So it was a lot of, you might sketch something out, but then you'd be physically like stitching it and like trying to create all these beautiful ideas that might eventually get used in the collection, which was always like such an amazing experience. But what I actually found interesting is that, some of the, I think, to find like similarities between the two, like there are some brands I've worked at where there is still an element of that at times. Like at Urban, they were very into, I think that whole Urban Free People group, they're very into like vintage and they're very into that craft. And I do think they, did look at a lot of, I mean, I was putting together embroidery design, even when I was at Urban. So it's not like it just stops if you go to high street. I just think different brands do it differently. And I've worked at brands where they're very hands-on, and for press shows, for example, you'll make all the collection in-house and you get to source all the fabrics and you work with embroidery and print designers and everything. And it can be very hands-on too. So I don't think high street like isn't that. I just think they just do it a bit differently, and it's maybe not all the time. But I definitely don't think high street market like totally eliminates that process.
I'd also like to add that I think one of the fun parts about working in the industry where the clothing has a cheaper price point is that was the first time that I saw my stuff on people on the street.
Yeah.
Like working in luxury, I never saw it. I was never running in those circles. And it's
maybe a celebrity.
Maybe the occasional celebrity, but you never knew if they actually bought it or not. So it's always fun to actually see someone that is just like you with the pair of jeans that you designed 8 months ago. I think that's the most exciting thing, and it still happens all the time. So I think it's a lot more interesting to actually design product that has more scope and more reach, and that's something I'm looking for now.
Yeah, no, totally. I completely agree. I think there's nothing like seeing, someone walking down the street, and like you said, even now, like you might have designed something years ago, but it doesn't mean it's gone away. Like people, there might be someone's, you might have designed a jacket. It's like someone's favorite jacket that they wear year in, year out, and you can spot them on the street and it tomorrow, and it's such a great feeling to see that. And like you said, there's probably more of a chance you'll see that than in the luxury sector. So I'm just going to move on to our next topic. So next up, I want to discuss about how to figure out whether starting your own business is the right path for you, because I think now, even like now, so more than ever, it's so relevant. I think the pandemic has caused a lot of people to maybe rethink their pathways, and I am seeing, I mean, I'm sure everyone will agree, I'm seeing increasingly more and more on my social media, on on all these different websites, like all these new brands starting up. A lot of the reason is obviously because there really is a lack of jobs in the industry right now, and so I think people are trying to find their own pathway and like how they could still succeed and money. I think it's allowed people time to really pause and think about what they want, and it's almost like a now or never situation for a lot of people. So I think whether you're a student or a professional, I think this definitely is like a really relevant topic. Personally, from my experience, I do think it is a little bit easier to do if you have a little bit of experience working in the industry already. You've built contacts, you're familiar with the overall process. There's only so much you learn at university. I think you really learn when you're in the job. I still am learning all the time now, and I've been doing this for over 10 years, and you don't stop learning. You're very much in industry involved from that, concept, final product. You're working with factories, and you've gained that confidence and that knowledge. But you know, it still can be done when you come right out of school. Like, it's totally doable. I've seen enough people do it. You know, it's really about who you know, who you're surrounding yourself with, and how far you're prepared to go with it. You know, there's a lot of information online now that can really help people, you know, navigate that new pathway. So Robyn, I would love to know a little bit like how you started your brand and your take on like starting your own business. Um,
Yeah.
and then potentially afterwards we'll talk a little bit more about how some of your students at Made are doing that as well.
Yeah, so I think for me, the more I learned about the industry, working in different roles, the more it was, I think they call it paralysis by analysis. So the more I knew, the more I understood how much would really go into building a business. And because these were, you know, huge brands, it was sometimes scary to think about how you might do that on your own. So it wasn't until I left Urban and I had a bit of time to really think about what was important to me. And it really just gave me the encouragement to say, you know, I can do this, or I can start small and I can work up. You know, I can start slow, and particularly with my focus now being on sustainability, slow is best. You know, the faster you go, the more costs, the more impact you have. So having a little break, even though this was back in 2016, I think it really helps me, 2018, helped me to have what a lot of people are having now, to time to think and time to create as well. And the funny thing was that when I look back at my portfolio from university and even the types of things I was making at different jobs, it was so much about the quality of clothing and like how things frayed and how things got more beautiful over time. And so, yeah, we were hand fraying fabric at McQueen, you know, just with our fingertips, which was amazing. But then at Urban, you know, working in denim, which I never knew I wanted to get into until the opportunity came up, it's all about how the fabric, you know, looks beautiful over time. And so we were trying to recreate all of these garments to make them look vintage. And I really just thought, well, I can actually use the beautiful vintage denim that's all over the world right now. You know, these vintage stores are full of amazing pieces. You just have to have an eye to pick them. And now I did. I had that skill from working there to understand what's a beautiful wash and what's something that's maybe done a little bit more cheap. So that helped me kind of appreciate the clothing that was out in the world and understand how I can maybe use those materials that are available to create something that's both my own, but both something that already exists and something that's also, you know, beautiful enough that people want to buy it. So, you know, when you're working with vintage, you really have to up your game on the finishings and understand, you know, the quality of manufacture, because not everybody wants to wear secondhand clothes. So you really have to educate people about, you know, why it's beautiful and why you've chosen those specific pieces. So I think in regards to like how my students work now, because, you know, I teach this program that's 12 to 18 months and it's mostly for people that have no experience in the fashion industry beforehand and they want to finish with a brand or a collection or an idea of something that they want to move forward with. So many of them are coming from the very beginning with the idea that they want it to be sustainable and they want it to be, you know, 100% eco-friendly. And I think in certain aspects, if you're starting, you know, as a person on your own with not too much experience, you can't do everything. You know, you can't have a zero carbon footprint right from the get-go. You have to kind of start with the things that you know. So you can start with dead stock fabrics, you can start with making things locally, but I think it's important to kind of start with the skills you have and continue to build. So maybe you work freelance or you work for other people. I found that technical sketching was actually an amazing freelance job to have because it allowed me to kind of sketch all day on the computer at QVC and then come home and rip up denim and work on my own stuff and start building, you know, my Instagram and my website in a more organic fashion, which was never a possibility working at other places because my brain was totally focused on that brand. So I think it's nice to find a balance and setting a plan as well. You know, not everything happens overnight. So thinking about where you want to be in 3 or 5 years and then looking at the skills you're going to need to get there. You know, who are you going to need to connect with and what are you going to need to outsource as well? Because you can't possibly do everything yourself. You're going to start off by doing it, but you have to have a kind of a plan into once money starts coming in, who can you start paying to do certain roles that maybe they're slightly better at, which will allow you more time to think about your growth. So it's important to sort of constantly be reflecting on what you're good at and building relationships as well. I mean, it's so much more important when you're building a team yourself rather than working for a company when everybody's there. You know, if you're working on your own brand, people don't have to work with you. So you have to be really polite and really responsible about building relationships that are long term. So, you know, if you're working for a photographer or with a seamstress, you have to make sure that you follow up with people really quickly and in an efficient fashion. Make sure that you're paying people what they deserve to be paid. So being understand about what the labor laws are in your particular area is really important. And so I think that's my biggest thing takeaway, is like building relationships with, you know, other freelancers. And maybe it's not just about you doing everything. Maybe you can think about building this brand that provides jobs for other people as well. So that's what we're doing right now. We're trying to sort of build mini communities that are maybe a little bit more local.
Yeah. And I think as well, like to your point about, you know, making connections and stuff, I think it's just, you know, being brave to reach out to people and ask questions. Like you might know someone that's done this already, or, you know, you might see someone that you just really admire and you don't know them, but it's just being a bit brave and like striking up those conversations with people.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people are like very willing to give out their knowledge to you. You know, they've all been through it before, so it's just, you know, you might not get a reply from some people, but other people are going to be more than happy to help you, and it could then build a long lasting relationship. So especially if, you know, if you're starting out and you maybe like haven't gone through that process of working for corporate, and you know, you really don't know that many people, it's just about being brave, really, I think. And I think the internet, social media, everything has opened those, you know, gateways to be able to do that. You know, you can reach out to someone on LinkedIn, you know, start with a compliment, like, I love what you're doing, I really admire it, and I'm trying to do this myself, like, I'd love some advice. You never know what you might, you know, what response you might get.
Yeah, and keep in touch with people that you've met,
Yeah.
you know, a little while back. Over the years, you'll start to build up sort of a network of people, but making sure that you're checking back in with them as well. Because it's so funny, when I started working at a brand 5 years later and I'd see someone that was there at my internship, you know, so making sure that along the way you're keeping out those feelers, because you never know when opportunities are going to come up and when your name might pop up for somebody else to recommend you as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think, yeah, going on that, like, I mean, I'm sure like you agree, like, you know, some people that I think the pair of us like probably still know now, you know, we knew like 10 years ago, and we just kept those relationships going, and you just never know like where that will get you. You know, there might be other opportunities that come up. You know, it's always great to have all these, you know, connections and friendships within the industry. You know, you can all help each other collectively in so many ways. Which kind of brings me on to, you know, just some other points in this area. Like, obviously through me doing this website, I've been really fortunate enough to interview a bunch of different people that have started up their own business. And a lot of them are people I've worked with in the past, I've interned with in the past, went to uni with, you know, they all came from these connections. And these are just like a few like common things that a lot of them were saying about starting their own business that I really wanted to share with everybody. So first of all was obviously just like, you know, we can't talk about starting your own business without funds and savings. You know, how are you going to pay to start this brand? Now, a lot of people would prefer to do this like themselves without any investment, in which case, you know, you really do need to have built in some savings before you feel confident to go for this. I mean, you can be building it slowly in the background, but to really like be prepared to then have a collection made and launch it, obviously you need some savings, because you really don't want to kickstart your brand or your label in debt. It's just, you know, not smart. So that's one thing, is just you can also do a lot of people do like, you know, funding as well. They will like reach out and ask people to be generous and donate to fund the start of their brand. So it's also another option. Another thing they mentioned was just like with sourcing factories, you know, that's obviously can be some of the most difficult part of starting your own brand, is like reaching out to all those different factories and, you know, figuring out like who's going to make something for the best price, but are they also at the same time, you know, getting paid the fair wage, and are they making it to the quality you want? Like, what are their minimums? There's like so many different things you have to go through for the factory. But luckily there are a ton of, you know, obviously, you know, the ton of sources online now that you can find out that information. There's so many factories like on LinkedIn. It's just really trial and error. And from what I understand from talking to other people, like it just takes time, and that's just something to be aware of. And then, as Robyn has like kind of already said, you just need to be prepared. It does take up all your time. You are wearing so many hats. You might be a designer one day, social media or marketing the next day, a post woman, the man the next day. There's just you're basically doing a whole business with one person or two people, however you start. And it's an amazing experience. Like from what I understand, you just learn so much. And that kind of leads me on to the last kind of point I had, was really just like, if you're creating a product, you could create the most beautiful product in the world, but no one's going to know about it unless you actually put it out there in front of their faces. So you can create this stunning website to go with it. You could start a really great Instagram, but unless you're actually like, marketing it, trying to reach out to people and really putting your brand and your label in front of their faces, like people just aren't going to know about it. And that's kind of the most common thing I've heard with every single person that started their own business. They create this, beautiful collection, beautiful, beautiful website and everything, and are surprised when they don't get anyone buying it on their first day of launching. So just something to bear in mind, because I think a lot of us get caught up in that creative process and just forget that side of it. Was there anything you want to add before I move on to sustainability, Robyn?
Well, I would say pre-pandemic, I was doing little things to start my brand, such as like pop-up shops. So there was some like rooftop bars and things where I would have like a rack of my clothing. So even if it was like mostly people experiencing, the evening and having some drinks, my stuff was around there, and I could, chat to people about what I was doing. And what makes it easier to talk to people about your stuff is to have a really, really clear concept. So, what is the number one thing that you're passionate about, and how do you describe that into a way that someone else can repeat it, to their friends and family? Like, I just met so-and-so and they have got the most amazing, beautiful floral prints. It's something like a keyword that you can say that appears on your Instagram and your website that just gets repeated over and over again, and it's what people are going to remember you for. So try and think about within your own brand what you're setting up that's like your key visual that people are going to remember you by. And it can be a value as well. Are you really into size and inclusivity, and then just making sure that all of the imagery and the way that you're speaking about your brand is always relating back to that. That would be what I would say, going forward. Just trying to get yourself out there in little ways. And you can also do it digitally now. So I think connecting with people on webinars like this is amazing. And there's a lot more like groups popping up, whether it's Facebook groups, that you can start to connect with people on your own level, and maybe like photographers and models outside of it. It's amazing how not necessarily a fashion designer or brand, but someone outside of that in a different job role can kind of connect you to other people, and you can start to build up those relationships. So it's all about kind of talking about yourself all the time, basically, and having a really key message.
Yeah, and I think like for a lot of people, like that can be quite uncomfortable too, really like being like, right, I'm gonna have to like really push myself, be like the face of this, and like really put yourself out there. And it's just, I think it just takes a bit of working up to if it's something that doesn't come naturally.
Yes, small brands have an advantage. You are the person that is the brand, it the best. And I think, customers are looking to connect a little bit more with brands now. So if you can make yourself, a feature of that, and really be personal about your experiences and how you're growing, people want to get connected with people that are taking steps to grow their brand. So talk about, the things that are going well for you, maybe some of the struggles and how you're going to get over them. It's a time to be open about all those different things, and people know that you're growing and trying to do better. So I think it's always interesting to see brands that are a little bit more honest about those things.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. I think people are almost charmed by the fact that you are being open and honest and truthful, and that you're a real person, and you're going through some highs and lows, as you go through that process. So I definitely agree with that. So I want to bring onto our next topic. So I want to talk about like morals, you know, in terms of like sustainability and social impact and how that's affecting a lot of our career choices right now. And again, super relevant topic, more so than ever. I think a lot of people in the fashion industry have started questioning. I mean, a lot of people were doing this, you know, 10, 20 years ago, but it's even more, you know, in the forefront right now. And a lot of people have been questioning like how things are done. And I think the pandemic has really given everyone that chance to like pause and reflect on these topics, you know, even if, you know, they weren't thinking about it already. So, I mean, from my experience, I mean, I know for quite some time, I've personally wrestled with like the negative impacts that, you know, my job has on the planet. It makes me feel really guilty. And it's one of those things that I probably should have been feeling like this when I first started out, like 10 years ago, but it just wasn't. I don't know if it's social media or, you know, obviously things are escalating with climate change and everything, but it just, I think it's grabbed everyone's attention more so than ever, probably in the last like 2 to 3 years. So, I mean, for me personally, you know, I feel like it is a difficult topic because, you know, we all still essentially need jobs to pay the bills. There's no arguing with that. And I think in a lot of ways, like for me, you know, as you can see, like I've worked at places like Primark, like Urban. A lot of these companies have been in the media recently for, you know, unethical practices. You know, they're not offering a huge sustainability choice. So, you know, I've worked at those companies and I know and think for me, it's like really from knowing what you can do from the inside. So, you know, you need a job, you know, you want to work for these big name brands, but like, what can you do to decrease your negative impact? So for me, like I've tried to push certain initiatives at previous jobs. So like really encouraging, you know, like for every purchase, the company will plant a tree, or, you know, using, you know, obviously increasing the presence of organic or recycled fabrications, and really trying to encourage, you know, your CEOs and the business itself just to be more transparent, you know, and taking a look, even a closer look, even just to sustainability in the office itself. Like, how can you be reducing paper? Have you got, you know, plastic utensils in the, you know, in the staff kitchen? It's all those little things that if you think about, like every business might have that much waste. If you can even just start with your office, you know, you could, you know, volunteer yourself as like a sustainability leader in your headquarters to just kickstart, you know, your day-to-day office situation. So that's kind of, you know, how I've at least started trying to implement that myself. I think ultimately the sticking point I've always found is profit. So, and this is common, you know, every time I've spoken to anyone else in the industry about this, we're all kind of saying the same thing, is that unless you're providing sustainable alternatives with the facts and figures to back them up, showing they're going to turn a profit for the company, you're not always likely to get your ideas heard, or for them to go through. And a lot of that comes down to just educating the customer too. You know, I think brands, especially large corporate brands, have a huge responsibility to be as open, honest, and transparent with their customers as possible. I think, you know, talking like trying to trace back, you know, if you're doing organic cotton, like where's the farm, like where is that coming from, where is that farm, like where is the original source of like where those, like, you know, fibers are coming from. So it's all those elements that I think brands now have a duty to do. And I think as soon as the larger corporate brands start doing this, it will start trickling down. But I think there's a real lack of that. I think it's actually more the smaller independent brands really coming to the forefront of that movement. So obviously I talk about educating the customer, and then just talking to friends in the industry that have their own businesses. You know, they've struggled because they want to be sustainable and ethical, but it comes at a price. So, you know, the fabrications, I mean, recyclable fabric's actually cheaper. That's for another, you know, another day to go into that. But organic, you know, it can be more expensive, often it is. And a lot of my friends that start their own businesses have really struggled, because a lot of people then saying to them, why is that dress or why is that jumpsuit such a high cost? I don't understand. Like, I can get something that looks very similar at, I don't know, ASOS or Zara or something. And the reason is because a lot of the organic fabrications more expensive. The processes, if they're trying to use like less harmful dyes and all of this, because not enough people are doing it right now, it is expensive. Like, the more people that do it, the cheaper this is going to get. And then the other thing is, they are paying their workers a fair wage, and that's why the garment costs more. And it's really hard to get that through to the average consumer. There's a lot of people very clued on about it now, but there's a lot of people, it's going to take time for that to get through.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that something that I think was interesting when you say, like, maybe a dress costs $20 or something. Yes, you can find one that's cheaper, but I think something that was interesting for my students, they say they want to sell their stuff at the same price points as the Forever 21s, of the world. But when they actually start making it and they learn how to sew and they see how much time it takes to make one of these garments, and you say, well, how much would you want someone to pay you to make this particular piece? The prices go up and up and up, because it can take hours sometime when you add all the bits and pieces together, let alone the cost of materials. And then if you are maybe shipping it from a different place, the costs go up and up. So I think you just have to sometimes educate yourself onto all the processes that are implicating the end price when you're building the brand, so that you understand, why things cost what they do, and it can help you then educate the customer and to justify it more. If you put on the website that the dress costs $200, but you say this dress took 3 hours to make, people will do the maths and understand it a little bit better as to why it justifies the price.
Yeah, and I mean, the hardest point of that really is, like, you really have to, everyone has to be realistic. Not all of us can afford a $200 plus dress. A lot of people, are buying for what their salary allows them to. And I think that's also something to bear in mind. But I think one argument is, obviously, as I was saying, the more companies that go down the sustainable, ethical route, it should eventually, especially the sustainable side of things, it should eventually like lower the cost, because more and more people are doing it. But the other thing as well is, like, with people that maybe can't afford it, there are other ways of like being sustainable. And again, a lot of this is for another day, because there's so much for us to get through. But upcycling, looking at what you've got in your wardrobe and like customizing it, or you can swap it with friends, or you can shop in secondhand stores. There are so many, you've got Depop, eBay, Poshmark, all of these. There are ways for you to still like have new clothing, but doing it in a more sustainable way. And then the other thing, obviously, there's been so much in the tabloids as well recently. And I actually had an article just go on my site recently about this. It's the human cost of fashion. Obviously, like Boohoo, Misguided. Boohoo obviously been in the tabloids a lot recently, with how much their garment workers in Leicester are getting paid. And that's another side of it, is a lot of people think locally made means that it's ethical and people getting paid the correct wage, and evidently that's not the case. So that's another thing to people to wrestle with the conscious on. But I think for industry professionals and students to really like decide what the right path is for them with like this situation, as I said before, like, you might not agree with how that brand works if you're working for them, but you can't always afford to be fussy. And especially now more than ever, everyone needs a job that's going to pay the bills. You can't always be so selective on where you're working. So for me, like, there's several options. You can either have that mindset that, okay, I might have to work for one of these brands, but maybe I can make a difference from the inside and use my knowledge to affect change that way. And then, there's other things like, if you are in a position that you can be a bit more fussy, then you can target sustainable brands, like target the brands that you really love, the sustainably, ethically made product, and really go the extra mile with them. Like, message them on LinkedIn, send them your some of your work, or send them your resume. Really, like, make that, go the extra mile to really try and get that job that you want with a brand like that. And then obviously another option is starting your own sustainable and ethical brand. It's definitely what a lot of people are doing right now. I mean, my only concern with it is I feel like the market's going to get oversaturated, because I'm seeing like new brands every day popping up with that side of things. But better that than starting a fast fashion brand that's going to have a negative impact. So Robyn, I'd love for you to jump in and just tell us a little bit more about your sustainable business, Blue Bangs, and just like why you felt the need to start it, because of, everything that's going on in the world, and like what triggered your ideas for this.
Yeah, a big part of it came from, when I was at Urban, there wasn't as much opportunity for creativity, but the times when it happened, I absolutely loved it. So sometimes we'd be waiting for a sample to come in from China, and it wouldn't make it to the meeting. So I would have to cut up jeans and make them myself. And that helped me to understand that I can really make these pieces on my own to a really nice level. And the more I made them and the more I started wearing them myself, so really understanding how they fit me, helped me to show it to friends and family. And then I saw them wearing it more, and that was just more and more exciting, and it started to snowball. So I did it, slow and steady. I was still working for other places, but I started to make pieces and to really understand and talk to people about why they liked them. So I learned a little bit more about, the details they liked. So maybe the things I thought were amazing, they hadn't noticed, but they'd noticed something else. And I started to focus more on doing those certain details and ways of making it or branding it or educating the customer as well. What I find so fun is like being able to give each piece a story, which I think big brands can't do when there's like thousands of one item, whereas with my pieces, there's only one. So I think that's fun to kind of have an aspect to your business where people can have a little bit more connection to the pieces they're buying, because we want them to last a lot longer. And if they love it and they understand the story and the history behind it or the inspiration, they're going to keep it and treasure it and repair it, which is always a big part, is to not only try and buy less, but to try and repair the pieces that you've already got. And denim's just like easier to repair because we love the way that it roughs up, and you can use Sashiko stitching and all that sort of thing. So I'm thinking now, the way that I want to build it is to start having a line that is more accessible. So we have like maybe smaller pieces and accessories that more people can engage with and buy, but have then pieces at a higher price point where I can really dive into, where did this piece come from? Why is it beautiful? What is the branding? Who do I think wore it beforehand? And all those sort of beautiful aspects. My students are really interesting in how they're building their brands, because they're looking at materials around them now. Maybe they're in their homes or they can't go to New York to swatch. So they're really starting to look at, all the materials in your home that you can start to build, fashion, amazing pieces out of. I have one student that's taking old prom dresses and turning them literally upside down and inside out, and, dissecting them and splicing them back together. And if you look at brands like Maison Margiela, that's exactly how they work. So you can create some pretty couture pieces from the stuff that you've got around you. So I think it's about being a little bit more hands-on right now and thinking about the resources that we've got maybe a little bit closer to home.
Yeah, for sure. I love the idea of you doing some little slightly like, bags, or you could do like, there's so many things that you can do with denim. I think it'll be really exciting for you to like branch out into that area for your brand. Mm-hmm. So is there anything else, like really, like, is there anything with like sustainable and ethical practices you're seeing like an increase of interest in that area with your students at Made? Is that something that you think is like growing?
Yeah, I think something that they're all looking for is dead stock fabric. So dead stock fabric is maybe leftovers from fashion collections, or maybe it's like leftover from the factory or vendor didn't actually use it. So they send them to these wholesalers and you're able to buy them at slightly cheaper prices, but get higher quality fabrics. I think that's an interesting part of the industry to build your brand around. Brands can do a really good job at creating, high quality pieces in that way. It's just, there's some nuance to it where sometimes these fabric manufacturers are making too much deliberately in the knowledge that they can just sell it off to these dead stock places. So you have to be a little bit more educated again as to whether these fabrics are actually dead stock, end of the roll. And then sometimes it's more fun to make pieces from those because you can make limited quantities, and maybe have a little bit more of like a hype behind them, do these like drops, product drops, and pop-up shops and things like that. So sometimes small quantities can really work to your advantage.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just get on, so I'm wary of time. I want to just get on to our last topic before we go on to the questions, like answering everyone's questions. So the last topic was really like how to know which role to choose in fashion. For example, whether you want to be a buyer, a designer, in production, technical designer. I mean, stylist, marketing, there's just so many different roles that make up the fashion industry, and sometimes it's really hard to know like where you fit in, like what is going to work for you. So I guess this is probably aimed more at some of the students watching, but I mean there probably are some other people that are a certain way in their career that like maybe fancy a change of pace, or want to get into a different area. I mean, a lot of us figure these things out as we go through high school and secondary school, college. And a lot of the time, like, you can take specific courses in these different areas as you go, if you know like what you want to do from early on. And even like I've heard a lot of friends that really didn't know what they wanted to do, but maybe had like a tutor or like a teacher that was able to guide them because they could see what their strengths were in. I have a friend that I think she started off doing like more of the design side, but her tutor said to her, you're really good at like the more technical side, patterns, like pattern making, everything. And she ended up being a technical designer because of that influence. So a lot of people figure it out as they go, but there are some of us that I think even after graduating, even years into your career, maybe you're a little bit unsure of like where they belong and what route to take, or if they took the right route. So again, like as I mentioned, internships are one option. Like it's a great way of figuring this out. With an internship, you can often try your hand at different roles, and see, what you enjoy doing the most. And I mean, I've also known a lot of people. I mean, there's a lot of people that will find this information online. I've tried to do. I'm trying to get as many articles as I can up on my site about all the different roles so people can learn a little bit more about what each role involves. But I think, as I said, when people have left uni, they don't always know what they want to do. I know people that have just fallen into roles. So, they might have really focused on design at uni, but they just want a job when they get out. Like they just need some money. They just want to get a job. And I was in that position too. When I left uni, I applied to buying and design roles, even though I knew I really wanted to just do design. But I didn't really know a lot when I left uni about what a buyer really did. And I was like, oh, well, they get to travel and that's cool. And so I was just applying for everything. So I could have like very easily ended up as a buyer, which now I realize definitely wouldn't have been the right pathway for me personally. I also, sorry, you go.
I think in internships, it's interesting to, be aware of the things that you're doing really well, or look above you to your, the people that are more senior, the designers, the senior designers. Do you like their lifestyle? Do you like the way that you think they're working? Are they spending most of their time on emails or sketching or traveling? And is that something that you see doing? And I think sometimes internships, it's getting better now, more are being paid, but I think the first 4 that I did were unpaid, which sounds, impossible, right? How do you live on no money? Well, even though I was working sometimes 80 hours a week for like 6 months on these internships, I would have breaks. So I would have, 6 months where I would do bar work. I worked in, a gift store, and I was really saved up my pennies. I lived at home. Even when I was working at Alexander McQueen, I was living with my grandma, so trying to be a little bit thrifty about how you can really conserve your resources and then allow you to do these internships that are going to get you better experience in the industry. It's not always going to be the most glamorous, but every single move you make is going to kind of not narrow your preferences, but it's going to kind of narrow your goals a little bit more. So just be aware all the time to be looking at all the different people around you in the different roles and really thinking about what their day-to-day life is. And that, I think that helps you. And like talking as well, building relationships with different departments is always going to help you. So if you can talk to the fabric teams and, the photography teams and really understand, what you like about their jobs, that can be great fun and great conversations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think as well, like from, I think going back to your point, even just about how do you even afford to do these internships, I think that's like such a great point to make, because I think a lot of people assume that you have to come from a wealthy background or to be able to afford to do all of this. And I know things are very different now to how they were when we were interning, but I was the same. All my internships I did were unpaid. I think I got all my expenses covered in terms of my train fare and my lunch. I mean, there was one where I got absolutely nothing paid for, and I actually walked out after 2 weeks because I wasn't learning anything. But all the other ones, yeah, it was literally just expenses paid. But again, similar to you, the way that I afforded to do that is I worked Saturday and Sunday. So I was working 7-day weeks for years. I was doing the internships during the week. I was working as a bridal consultant on a Saturday, and I was working at a department store in the men's section on the shop floor on a Sunday, and did that forever to, save up. And then throughout the summer, I was then grabbing every extra shift I could at the bridal store to afford this lifestyle. And then, I mean, terribly, I kind of used a lot of my student loan to go to New York for DVF, because I mean, that was the only way I could afford to do anything like that. I mean, everything
Sure.
was
Education.
huh?
I'm sure it was an education, so it still counts.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot. But yeah, so that's the thing. Is the other thing that a lot of people do say is, how do you afford it? And honestly, it's just grafting. It's hard work. It's finding every spare minute to be working, doing something else and earning money. But luckily, a lot of internships do pay now, which is great. I wish they'd done that when we were doing it. And so, yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention as well is that, like, I know people that have even gone through, I mean, I actually have another article on my website, like my friend, Sarah, she basically she was a designer at River Island and then at Debenhams with me, and several years in was like, this isn't for me. Like she'd done design, like designing at uni, she'd gone through all the stages, and just a few years in was just like, no, this isn't for me at all. And she really wanted to be in writing, and so she left the industry completely and she started from the ground up again. She started doing internships in magazines, at lots of well-known publications, managed to get in there, work her way up, and that's her full-time job now, is writing for one of these magazines. And pre-pandemic she was traveling the world doing this. So there's definitely, you might get stuck in a role for a while that maybe isn't for you, but doesn't mean to say you can't get out of it. I think it's just about patience. It's about having that support network. I mean, she could not have done that without her parents, because they very kindly covered her rent for a while she was doing those internships again in London. So that does help to have a support network with that. So Robyn, I'd love to know, like, your thoughts on this, like if you've experienced this much with your students, with them not really knowing what route to go down, like what role to take, or if you know anyone else that's been in that situation. Because I mean, a lot of these different roles vary from company to company too. Like I was going to say as well, like a buyer at one company can be so creative. It could be the most creative role ever, because maybe there's like not so much of a design presence there. Or you could go to another company and it's really all just about number crunching. So again, like, doesn't matter what role you choose, it could be completely different on each company as well.
I would say for the students, when they're in their program, they're trying out lots of new skills for the first time. So they're sewing, they're sketching, digital design, and even a bit of number crunching as well. So as a fashion designer, you do learn a lot of these different aspects that go into different roles. One thing I'm encouraging right now is to learn digital design. So things like Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and even Clo 3D, which is a way of pattern making in 3D forms and sampling, is going to become exponentially, valuable on your resume. The other thing I think is really important is getting written references. So I think this helps for Olivia's question, is for every internship I did, whether they had a big name or not, I made sure that every manager that I worked for hand wrote me or typed up a logo stamped written reference at the end of every internship. And that really helped me take that to the next job and get the next job, because it's almost like evidence that they really liked you and you were a good intern and you'd worked really hard. So I think if you can learn some digital aspects along the way, like maybe doing technical sketches or digital pattern making, that's going to help you in lots of different roles. And it's also going to show potential employers that you can learn new systems, because a lot of these brands are building their own internal systems that are very digital tech based, and they want to see people that are willing to learn it. You might not know Code 3D off the bat, but if you've shown that you've understood different levels of different programs, you can kind of get into that job, and then they'll train you on the job, and then just making sure that you're recording all of that on your resume.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, what I was also going to say as well is that, talking about like different roles previously and stuff, is that I really noticed that from my career in the UK and the US has differed quite substantially. So, you know, it even differs from country to country how different brands work. So I feel like in the UK, like my design role was quite different. Like I've out here, like from some of the brands I've worked at, you're also doing like a lot of the stuff that I would normally feel like a buyer would have done. So I feel like out here I've actually worn many more different hats than I actually did in the UK. So like, you know, out here I've definitely done like, you know, more approvals, you know, even more liaising with factories. Like it really like varies from every single brand. So, and even in my last role, like, you know, using Excel spreadsheets all the time, well, it never was something I've done anywhere else before. So it's just like, you know, it does vary from place to place. And even
There'll be technical, I was gonna say there'll be technical parts to every job. So Excel spreadsheets are never going to go away. If you can wrap your head around that, it's going to help you massively in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. I think to prepare for like a multiple like different roles, it's good to have like a hand in every, you know, different like software programs and everything. And then even just down to, you know, how different teams and roles work at different companies. I was saying to Robyn earlier, like, you know, Urban, we had almost a team for everything. There was, you know, a concept team who would really just be providing you with your mood boards, and they would do this lovely traveling and, you know, get to come up with these concepts. I mean, to me, they had the best job. And we had a whole color team where they just had a color room, and there was girls that just focused on providing the palettes for everyone. Whereas other companies I've worked at, you know, as a designer, you do all of that. That's your job. You do that and the designs. Similar again with like a technical designer. Some companies I've worked at, I've been doing all the specs, the technical specs myself. And then other companies I'll go to, they have someone that, you know, specifically does that role. So you really pass off your design to them, brief them on what it is you want it to look like, and go into some detail, and then they take it away and figure that all out for you to send to the factory. So again, similar to production, some places I've worked, you have a whole production team, you have a fabric sourcing team. Other places, as a designer, I've worn all those hats too. It really, you know, it's tricky when you're trying to pick what pathway to go, because it does differ like in every company.
Yeah. And something I did that maybe helped me was I wasn't afraid to apply for sort of any and all jobs, and then treat the interviews as not only an interview practice for myself, which helped me to practice for when the, you know, the big brands that I loved came up, because I tried with the small ones, but it also was an opportunity for me to ask them questions. So making sure that you always have, you know, 2 or 3 questions written down, you know, in your notebook, to make sure that you can ask them about the things that are really important to you. You know, what is the length of the day going to be like? You know, how much commuting is there going to be? You know, what are the day-to-day roles that they're going to expect of you, and what they think that you'll be learning on the job, as opposed to what you should already know. So kind of treat those interviews as a way to dissect what the job's going to be, and to learn about different brands just by, you know, opening up in that conversation, you know, process. You can do a lot more interviews than the jobs you actually get, or even the jobs you choose to select. But I think it's good to put yourself out there all the time. I was doing, you know, video interviews for my internships at Alexander Wang, and then sometimes, like I said, Paris, I'd actually have to go there physically in person. So sometimes you've got to be a little bit more, you know, flexible in how you get to these brands. And I was going to mention, when I was trying to get a job in New York, I would actually print out, 100 resumes, staple all of those different references that were handwritten onto the back of each one. And then I just Googled where the headquarters were, and I would walk up to security, and I would say, hello, I'm looking to get an internship. And most of the time they would turn me away, but sometimes they would take the resume from me and take it up to the HR department. And I actually got some interviews and follow-ups from doing that. So whether you're mailing it to them, or if you're physically taking it from door to door, sometimes that can be a fun experience and pays off in the end, because they just think, oh, well, this person's doing it a little bit differently. Maybe I want to get to know this person. They seem really passionate about getting into this particular brand.
Yeah, it's definitely a ballsy move. I think it works though. And I definitely other places I remember when I interned at Matthew Williamson, one of the girls that's like now like a good friend of mine, so Matthew Williamson was based in London, but she was from the US, and she really got their attention because she created the most beautiful resume I've ever seen in my life. She had made this like lovely resume like on paper, but she'd like put it in this beautiful folder that she'd embellished the folder herself. So she'd like put all these beautiful embellishments, embroideries, and because that company was that was what the label was about really. It was beautiful prints and embroideries and embellishments. She just really got their attention. They were like, wow, this girl like really made an effort, and she ended up actually landing the job there after our internship eventually. So it just goes to show, like, going that extra mile. Like, it's very competitive out there, and sometimes it's kind of like needed to get people's attention.
It's also quality over quantity. So writing, personal cover letters, making sure that it's short and sweet, but you're writing something about that brand and why you think you're right for it. Don't just copy and paste to every single brand. They'll see it a mile off. Just make sure that you're showing in some way that you understand what they're doing right now and how the brand is, currently working or designing, or what their personal goals are. There's so much you can learn from the social media and websites before you apply to a job to really make sure that you've tailored it to that.
For sure.
Yeah.
So let's get started with the questions, because I'm aware we've been doing this for about an hour yet now. So I'm going to start with Olivia. So she asked, how do you grow your business in the fashion industry? So obviously the closest thing I have in terms of experience to this is really my website, Fashion and Free. And I know it's not quite the same as a clothing line, but for me, it's really been about networking and getting your business out there in front of everyone, like really dedicating yourself and your time to even just the marketing side of it. You don't have to spend a ton of money to do this. You can create like a lovely Instagram account, go out there and follow people, try and like message people, connect, like try and get what you've got like in front of their faces. And I think it's about just being prepared to go slow and steady with it. I think, like what we've already discussed, I think quite a lot of people I know that have started this have said that's the best way to go, because if you're going too fast, that's where you're going to make mistakes, and they're going to sometimes be costly mistakes, and then that could hinder the growth of your business. So I think just going slow and steady, it's not a race, and just be mindful of your spending, because I know a lot of people that have started brands right now, and it's a lot of my friends weirdly started their brands in March, and that's when the pandemic really hit a lot of us across the world. And for them, they said that all they're doing right now is just trying to make enough money off their first collection to fund the next collection. So it's just being realistic with expectations and your spending.
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to almost predict that you're not going to make any money off of the first collection, or you're going to come out quit. So you almost have to have a couple of seasons worth of savings backed up. But another thing you can do is to really make sure that what you're putting out into the world is really specific. There's no point in saying my target customer is between the ages of 18 and 45. That's a massive group of people, and you have to be way more specific. So I think starting with a small group and community of people, and making sure that, maybe it's you're targeting people that all love the same type of music, or they all go to the same sorts of concerts or watch the same TV shows. You know, what is the specific things that they're all passionate about that make them aligned? If you have 20 customers, it might not sound very much, but if they come back to you time and time again, that could be way more valuable than trying to target 100,000 people and only getting a couple of sales. So try and focus your marketing onto a really small group of people and really serve them and be really personal about your messaging.
Yeah, definitely. I think more so now than ever. I just think there's just so much competition out there. The market's really highly saturated. So I think just being able, like Robyn said, just reaching out to people on like more of a personal level, I think is definitely the way forward. And a lot of new brands I've started seeing, you know, they do a lot of videos, like it's just them filming themselves, talking about their progress, saying thank you to everyone for their support. And I think that personal, like human touch is like really what everyone's responding to right now, actually more than ever. I think the pandemic definitely affected that, but I think that was happening before as well. So I hope that helps, Olivia. The next one we have is from Andrea. So during the pandemic, what would you recommend a student to work in order to start gaining experience in industry, maybe remote job recommendations? So it is really hard right now. I'm not going to beat around the bush, as they say. So, I mean, obviously in some places in the world, things are starting to open up again. I have seen on LinkedIn and places like that, you know, there are internships that are coming up right now. I do think it's easier possibly for more like social media and marketing students probably to be getting internships, probably more so than design. But that's not to say that it's not possible. I'm sure that if you reach out to companies, a lot of companies are really like needing that support right now because, you know, a lot of people in the industry have been laid off. They're not, you know, they don't have that team that they had before. And so if you can try and find a paid internship somewhere with a company that maybe need that support, but maybe obviously can't pay a full-time salary like the regular staff would have got, that's obviously an option. I think it's all about just, again, as we said, going that extra mile, reaching out to these brands, saying, hey, like, I love what you do. Like, I feel like I could be a great support during this time. And I really want to learn. And I mean, for me, that's probably the best way, but it's really hard right now because obviously normally you would be working in an office. Even countries that are doing well during the pandemic right now or doing better are still not going back to the office. I think there's a lot of people that love working from home. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people who just don't want to take that risk. And it's to do with overheads too. A lot of businesses like don't want to open their offices back up right now because they just can't afford to. It's actually cheaper for them to work from home. I don't have anything to add, Robyn.
One job that I discovered that I didn't realize was, you know, so sought after was technical sketching. So that's when you create the digital sketches in Adobe Illustrator. I think when I was in college, it was just starting to become a really big part of the education, but still in the industry, there's designers that don't know or don't want to spend time doing that. So when I was at QVC, they actually created a job that was just technical sketching all day. And that's something you can do in your laptop with just an easy Adobe Illustrator, you know, subscription. And that's kind of a job where you're finding something that people don't want to do, or they don't want to have time to learn to do it necessarily, and you can become really good at it in a short amount of time. So maybe think about those things that are more digital based that you can do on like a freelance basis, whether it's like pattern making or you know, spec sheets or digital print design maybe. All those sorts of things can be really valuable on like a short-term basis to try and get into these companies. So look for freelance remote opportunities, and you never know when you're going to become so valuable that you'll become like a permanent part of the team because they'll need you so much.
And there's also that website Upwork. I don't know if you've heard. So Upwork, you can really like advertise yourself as, you know, whatever role you do. I mean, it's probably easier for a designer than it is for a buyer, but, you know, a lot of the time different companies are looking for that freelance work on Upwork. So you can kind of create your own little business through that and start working freelance for some companies. But I think such a crazy and unique situation that we're finding ourselves in, the best thing you can do is really like figure out a way to get their attention. If you're a buyer, potentially, look at how they're doing, look at the market. You could potentially put a little, presentation together for them, and like how you think they could improve, things like that, and what you think they do really well at. Like, that's often something. I mean, even when I interviewed for Primark, one of the things they asked me to do was to actually do like a customer profile analysis. So I sent them all my design work, but then I also analyzed like who I felt their customer was, and really went into detail on the analysis side. So it's obviously not just, there's probably people that are looking at this that aren't just on the design side, and I think there's definitely ways. I think it's just, you've got to be very I don't know, forward with, your approach, and really reach out to the right people. And
yeah, one way that I found to get internships was either on LinkedIn or connecting through other like student groups, is to understand who's interning at different brands, because they're not going to intern there forever. Eventually they will move on to a different place. So if you can like build a network of interns, you can actually start to share these opportunities with each other, because they'll know when they're finishing, and they can kind of offer your resume up to their manager, and it can be a lot more personal recommendation. So don't just look for like the designers and senior designers on LinkedIn, look for the actual interns as well, because they're on the floor, they know who's shifting in positions, and they might have a little bit more time on their hands to speak to you and give you some like insider knowledge as to what positions are opening up, because they will open up eventually. I think it's just about being ready when they do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as well. Like, obviously the situation we find ourselves in isn't forever. I mean, there's definitely certain places. I mean, obviously a lot of people coming to us from around the world. There's definitely some countries that are faring way better than us in the US. But there's certain areas even in the US that's starting to open back up again. So it really just depends where you are in the world as to the situation at the moment. Olivia's also asked another question. So this is to you, Robyn. Working at McQueen, how did you get into such a big brand, and would you say it's difficult?
It's definitely difficult, because obviously they've got so many different people applying, but that's when the personal recommendations really help. So, it wasn't my first internship. I said it was like, I think my fifth or sixth, graduate traineeship as it was. One thing I did was to have an amazing physical and digital portfolio. So having a mini version that you can send in an email that doesn't give them everything, but gives them a teaser. I'd also had a really specific portfolio, and some of my projects, my graduate collection, was based on tailoring. So it wasn't just any old beautiful collection. It was actually something really specific to the core of the brand. So if you're interested in a specific luxury brand, making sure that you've got a project or two that has the same inspiration or references that they would see, because they might, understand that you're really creative and talented, but if they can't see that you can interpret their style and pick it up really quickly, they don't necessarily have the time to teach you. So showing, even if it's with a personal project, spend the weekend, spend a week, really diving into the brand and creating, a mini capsule collection, just a digital portfolio of sketches. You don't have to make the whole thing physically, but you need to show them that you understand their aesthetic, and that you can work to their like quality of make as well. So learning how to sew for luxury brands like that, you might be sewing physical samples all day as an intern. So don't overlook those like fundamental techniques as well.
Yeah, and I will just say as well, like, I think for some of those big brands, especially like McQueen, you just have to, I mean, obviously right now, as we said, people are probably working from home, but I think back when you were doing it, and I know a lot of other people that did internships or worked at places like that, it's long hours. Like you really do have to prepare for that. You're not signing up for a 9 to 5. You are signing, I mean, I don't even know what you're signing up. You're signing up for,
9 to 10 maybe.
9 till 10. I mean, some of the places that I've worked as well, it's the same situation, especially around the time of a fashion show or a photo shoot, often working till pretty late, like 9 or 10, maybe later, just to get ready for it. It's not ideal, but it's just one of those things you have to be prepared to do. And it does carry on through when you start working for, like, even when I worked at these high street brands, definitely I found myself stuck at the office on a Friday night at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, and I would say that's when like attitude is everything. You know, the people you're working for are probably under a lot of pressure. So understanding that, you know, if they're a little short, you're there to support them. So having a can do, like positive
Yeah.
attitude, and asking, you know, questions efficiently and, you know, making sure that you're working in a timely fashion. And when they see you working, that you've got your head down and you're not chatting. You know, it's funny, it's all about those small things that really help. And that's going to get you a really great written reference and verbal reference as well, because again, all those designers know each other and bounce around between brands every couple of years sometimes. So the more that you can represent yourself in a really good light, the better you're going to be off in the long term.
Yeah, and I think like don't be afraid to speak up with ideas you have too, because I think people respond really well if they see you're quite an innovative person. And even from my experience, just we my first job, we would have design meetings every Monday, and it was a chance for the design team to speak up on a thing like they'd done over the weekend that was relevant, or something they're feeling passionately about. And probably to everyone's annoyance, I was probably doing that every single week. I always had something to say. I'd been to an exhibition, and then I would create this huge presentation on it. And I ended up getting promoted a lot at that first company, so it obviously worked. And so I think it's just going that extra mile and really showing just how enthusiastic you are and just bringing ideas to the table. I think people really respect that.
Yeah, they're going to remember you because that you're passionate about it and you always have, you know, a positive thing to say and, you know, a suggestion to make. So taking time to get inspired as well and look outside of your industry sometimes into the arts and cultures can really help to build up your references.
Okay, and then the last question we have is from Jacqueline. So, what are the major differences between attending college for fashion design versus a certificate program, for example, like what you're doing at MADE, which is a really great question. And before you answer that, just if anyone else has any other questions, like now's the last chance to pop them in there before we finish up. So if you just want to answer Jacqueline's.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing that I discovered between a fashion degree, like what I took, and a diploma is the amount of time that is spent. You know, a degree is 4 or 5 years, so there's all this time for experimenting and project after project, whereas a diploma at MADE, you're learning all the fundamentals that you need, and then you can go off and experiment afterwards. I think, you know, coming from the UK where the fees are so much lower, and I look at the fees of American colleges here and I'm just, you know, appalled. Where so I think a program like MADE allows you to get a really good foundation and try out all those different things that we spoke about, you know, sewing, illustration, digital design, pattern making, all crucial things to becoming a great designer, whether you're working in your own or through a brand. So I think the other thing that MADE gives that maybe other colleges don't is the encouragement to do things on your own and to kind of go about things in a way that works for you. You know, there isn't one right path. Not everybody's going to be amazing at everything, but we help you to try everything out and understand what works for you and what you're really passionate about. So I think even though the program's a little bit shorter, it allows you to kind of dip your toes, and then you have time afterwards to kind of experiment and refine your aesthetic. You don't have to be in a college necessarily to do that.
Yeah, and I do think with just using MADE as an example, I think it has more of that personal touch. And it's, I mean, obviously we've both been through like normal, like regular kind of university way of doing things. I mean, often you have a huge class of people, everyone's trying to compete for attention, and I mean, you still get pretty good education out of it, but there is that less like personable touch and less like focused interaction maybe with your tutor,
Yeah.
when there's people in a class. I mean, obviously it's a little bit different right now with the pandemic and a lot of things are online for a lot of people, but that's definitely like one advantage I'd say to like doing what you guys do.
No, it's totally right. You know, in college, I was in a group of, we started at 50 and I think it ended at 20 something. So, you know, who knows what happened to the other 30 people? It must have been so tough that, you know, people weren't able to stay on. Whereas I think we keep our classes really small. And now that we have the option for online plus the studio learning, you can really make it a bit more flexible around whatever your day job is right now. I think we have to be very honest that you might not be starting from a place of like having loads of fun. So maybe you need to have like a day job or a night job, and then you can be learning on the side. So I think it's a little bit more accommodating to everybody's lives as they are now, and as we're beginning to create jobs that we want to be in every day of the week. I think we're starting to make decisions. We're a bit more cognizant about what we want our day-to-day lives to be, and I think that's the way that the program works well. It kind of sets you up for that idea of do you want to be a freelancer, do you want to work for yourself or for other people, and we can help you make those decisions.
Yeah, for sure. And then we've got a couple more questions. I'm hoping the video doesn't cut out because I did only set it to an hour and a half. I'm hoping it will just keep going. So apologies if we all of a sudden just cut out. We'll try and reload again, but hopefully we can just keep carrying on. So Livia said, do fashion designers do a lot of traveling? Yes, we always used to. I did a lot of traveling when I was in the UK, and I think it's maybe not so much anymore, but when I was in the UK, I was traveling every few weeks. I think it depends on company to company. I think it depends what level you're at the company. Like some companies are very open for assistants to travel. Other companies, it's very much like senior and director level. So that varies completely. I found that I did a lot less travel since being in the States to what I did in the UK. But again, that could have just been the companies I worked at. When I was like especially my first job at Debenhams, I would be traveling to Istanbul, to our factories in Turkey, like every few months. And then I was also doing a bunch of shopping trips. So I was going to Barcelona, Ibiza, Paris. I loved it, I'll be honest. It was best trip ever. And recently, my most recent company, we do more local shopping trips, but then I would go to China for like at least 2 weeks to visit our factories over there. So designers, buyers, generally it's kind of the same amount of travel. And then other areas, maybe a bit less so. Obviously, as a stylist, you might get to go on a lot of location shoots as well. So it really depends on the role, but obviously pre-pandemic, I think the pandemic could change things a lot with that side of things. I think people realizing that Zoom is actually more effective than they ever realized before. So when people are trying to cut costs, I definitely think that could be something.
I haven't done much traveling for my individual jobs. What I tried to do was make sure the job was in a different country every time. So I tried to be a little bit more adventurous in that respect. And I think that helped me, really live in different places, which was lovely to kind of experience, Paris, actually being there. I had no money, but I would walk to the studio every morning, and just like absorb it all, which was like wonderful. So even if you're working, crazy hours as an intern, you just make sure it's in a place that you love, and then you can experience it that way.
Yeah, and I think to Robyn's point as well, like that's such a great thing to do. You just have to be mindful as well. If you do want that experience of working from country to country, it's really like, there are visa situations involved as well. Like you do have to get visas. It does suck. It's a bit of a process, but obviously it's completely worth it. So, and then I'm just looking at our other questions. So Olivia also just said, like, what advice would you give to a teenager in the fashion industry? From my experience, I started doing internships when I was about 16. I don't even know if that's legal, but I know that I did a few days at a supplier for Topshop and things like that. So I was sketching from the age of 10. I knew what I wanted to do from a long time ago. So I just say keep sketching, keep practicing. I was getting university pamphlets years before I was actually going to leave high school, so I was a bit ahead of myself. But it's good to have that enthusiasm and work out where you think you want to go. And as I say, if you can get experience earlier on, my first experience I actually got through this guy whose kids I babysat, and he worked for a supplier for Topshop, and so I did about a week or two with them, and that was amazing at age of 16. Invaluable experience.
I think thinking 2 steps ahead is the idea for me. I thought about, what degree I wanted. And so I picked the foundation diploma that helped me get into that degree. I wanted to, do internships in different places. So I made sure that the degree I picked allowed me to intern in the middle of my degree. And even as a teenager, I didn't specialize in fashion until really I was about 18, 19 years old. In the UK, we do these fashion diplomas, but I got all my A levels in more academic subjects. So I think even if you want to be in the fashion industry, there's still, you know, a lot of value to having a great foundation in, you know, your maths and sciences and even languages. I studied maths, biology, French, and art was all I did before I specialized in fashion. And just having a great, you know, artistic side and sort of educating yourselves in, you know, going to museums and things like that. You don't have to be purely into fashion. You can kind of let your whole world kind of create the type of designer that you're going to be.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, math is really,
yeah.
That's a bit I struggled with because math's never my strong subject, and I've found, you know, especially pattern cutting as well, you know, that mathematical knowledge is really, really important, and that's actually an area I struggled in the most because of that. So if you have that side to you, I mean, even better. And Robyn, doing other subjects really is a good thing to do, I think.
Yeah, there's so many people applying to fashion programs now that actually having things are outside of the fashion world kind of makes you more unique. You know, we have a lot of students that apply that are coming from the medical field, and it's fascinating to see their different perspective on the world. You know, that's all fashion is a lot of people bringing their own outside knowledge in is what makes it really interesting. So if you have things that you're passionate about, it doesn't have to necessarily be fashion for you to be a great designer.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, with that in mind as well, just in the scientific side, sustainability, I mean, those people that have that mind and have that knowledge really have so much to contribute to the industry, more than, you know, someone like me that didn't do that as a specialist area. Just want to say, we've got one more question, but I just want to say to everyone that sent all these really lovely messages, thank you so much. Kind of you, and I'm glad you've enjoyed our chat. We're wrapping up very soon, I promise, because I know we've been going on for quite some time. So yeah, thank you so much for your messages. I'm gonna just do one more question, which is, what according to you is your favorite part of being a fashion designer? So do you want to go first on that one, Robyn?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky in that I enjoy a lot of the different parts, but I think the thing I love the most is seeing my work on other people, you know, like being able to like physically give it to someone, to see them like loving it and, you know, keeping it in their wardrobe for years to come is the most fun. So whether it's custom or it's, you know, ready to wear, I think that's a really big rewarding part of the job to me.
Yeah, and I think for me, I mean, there's two parts. One is really just being able to exercise that creative part of your brain for a living is amazing, because, you know, even when I've worked at jobs where maybe the design part of it isn't as creative as I'd like it to be, I've really noticed how much I crave that, and I'll find other ways outside of that job. You know, I'll go and take some creative classes or something just to use that part of my brain. So I think if you're that way minded, like getting to do that for a living, you just can't really beat that. It doesn't feel like a job. And then I also just think, for me, like, I mean, the traveling side really appealed to me when I got into this. Like, I love to travel. If I could just travel the world for my whole life and not have to worry about a thing, that would be my goal. But you know, that side of it, I really, really enjoyed it. Like, I'd love to go and meeting all these different people and traveling to different countries and getting that window into like how other places work.
Yeah, thank you everyone for all your lovely comments. It's been so lovely to be able to connect with you all.
Yeah, so we're just going to round up now. I think that's it for everything. Thank you so much for sticking with us for this long. I know it's been an hour and a half. It's a long time, especially for anyone tuning in at a weird time as well. First of all, before we finish, I just want to say that some people have been saying about any future Zooms, like, definitely planning on doing this, hopefully every month, maybe even more frequently. Really depends. There'll be like a new special guest each time, but obviously if Robyn ever wants to return and do another one with me, she's more than welcome. And yeah, so obviously most of you are already following us, but obviously we have an Instagram, which is @fashionandthefree. Have our website, fashionandthefree.com, and for anyone that hasn't already, we have a subscription where you can sign up for a monthly newsletter, and you get, basically, you can see all the articles first time around. Trying to include as many new ones with different people in different fashion roles, just so that, you know, there's that educational aspect. But I'm always open to, you know, audience input. So if anyone ever has any ideas about anything they'd love to read about, just don't ever hesitate to reach out to me on social media, because I'm always looking for that audience input. And then Robyn, I will hand over to you before we go.
Yeah, so follow my brand for sustainable denim. It's at Blue Bang Shop on Instagram. And then definitely follow the school. It's at made_institute. And we have lots of new online courses coming up. I know everyone's at home, but they're trying to kind of improve themselves and their skills. So I wanted to give a special thank you to everyone that came today, and we have a special offer. So any of our online courses that are coming up in Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, fashion illustration, and pattern making, you can actually get 10% off right now with the special code for all you guys, which is summer fashion. So if you type in summer fashion into the checkout, you'll get 10% off any of those online courses. And we've got a few coming up, so definitely check them out on our website, which is www.made-institute.com. You can also find a link through on our Instagram.
Yeah, and then if anyone actually wants to read further about Robyn as well, I actually didn't. She was one of the first people I interviewed for my website, and she talks a little bit more about how she started her brand and Made Institute, and there's a bunch of links on there. All the links she just mentioned are on there. So if you go on our website, click on stories, scroll down towards the bottom. Since she was one of the first ones, she'll be there near the bottom. But yeah, thank you so much again for everyone for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to us. And yeah, there'll be some more webinars coming up. So stay tuned, keep your eyes out on social media and on website. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.